Welcome back, everyone. Appreciate you all being here today. I have what I think is going to be a good one here for us. It's why Europe is insanely well designed. Now, this is obviously comparing it to the U.S. and what made me interested in this or want to do this video is I've seen lots of comments on my videos. I've seen comments on lots of other videos. People don't understand just how big the U.S. is. I see a lot of them on TikTok of people from Europe, mainly the UK, coming over and being like, holy cow, we thought that we could see New York City, Miami, and LA in like a 2-day span. It's like, well, you can if you fly and you spend just a couple hours in each city, because the U.S. is so big. But it's also very poorly designed, because I've always been in awe of how public transportation and everything is in Europe. So I thought this one would be a cool video. I mean, obviously, you can see all the dots on just the opening screen here of just, I'm assuming, railways or something, in order to connect each country. So anywho, let's just hop into it. Why Europe is insanely well designed.
This is a map of Europe's mass transit railway system across 33 countries.
So good.
The yellow lines indicate the presence of a train line, and as you can see, it's very dense. There are hardly any spaces where there isn't any coverage for railways. Now, if we compare this to a map of railroad tracks in the US, it's a different story. While parts of the US have some good mass transit, there are large areas of the country which isn't covered by Amtrak, the nation's largest passenger railroad service. But let me show you another map, this time of high-speed rail in Europe. Now obviously, high-speed railways aren't going to be as common as regular speed railways, as they require excellent design, strict planning, and massive investment. And yet, as we can see, high-speed rail is present in Europe, which is a stark contrast to the US, as you can see from this map. While the US does have some higher speed rail, like the Aquila line in the Northeastern Corridor, it's hardly an effective map of transport solutions. And the Aquila line isn't really that fast either. You can reach about 150 miles per hour.
I mean, look at that right there. Boston to our capital, Washington, D.C., not the state of Washington, just Washington, D.C., is 457 miles, And when you look at it on a map, they're like that far from each other on a map, you know what I mean? So the US is a lot bigger than I think people realize it is, and that's why I wanted to do this video, because I just wanted to see, when you take the continent of Europe, it's actually, I think it's bigger than the actual mainland US, and how did they design it as well as they did, and we can't seem to do that.
But averages less than 70. This is not the case for Europe's insanely well-designed railroad system. And you have to remember that Europe's system accomplishes this while spanning 33 different nations in a very diverse continent. And I know what you're probably thinking. This is just because Europe is smaller than the United States, which simply isn't true. While the European Union is smaller than the US, continental Europe has an area that is about 1.04 times as much as the US. So we can dismiss this argument that the United States can't be that well designed because it's too big. Europe simply is better designed. But if you're American, you might not understand why railroad tracks or public transport as a whole is so important. I mean, driving a car works fine, right? Well, no, and Europe showcases why a primary focus on private transportation is so detrimental to a well-functioning transit system. Look at these maps. They show the US road network versus the EU's. And as you can see, the EU's road network is not nearly as impressive as the US's. And yet, when you look at some of the most congested cities in the world, European countries don't feature particularly prominently in the global rankings. This is pretty shocking information, because you'd assume that the country with a more expansive road network has a lot less congestion, especially considering the United States has devoted lots of time and money to their highways. So how come Europe is less congested when they have fewer roads? Well, it all comes down to disincentivizing the use of cars and, most importantly, making an attractive alternative. Europe does this by having both private and public transportation infrastructure, which technically the US has as well, it's just a lot worse. But on top of this, Europe makes it pretty expensive to buy.
I'm gonna stop it real quick. I'm just gonna ask a question before we get too far into it. How safe are your train stations and subways and stuff? Because I've never been to New York City, thankfully. Don't plan on ever going to New York City, but I've heard that the subway system there is sketchy. So how is it in Europe? I mean, just, it's a vague question because Europe is massive, I understand, but how is it in your country that you live in Europe? If you're European watching this.
I own and use a car. This is achieved by having high taxes on vehicles and gasoline. In fact, here's a map of worldwide gasoline prices. As you can see, European nations are in the top rankings, while the US lies at the bottom, charging very little. But let me be very clear, it's only a good idea to make it expensive to drive a car if you have an attractive alternative, which America doesn't, but Europe does. I mean, obviously this wouldn't work in the US with its current transportation infrastructure, but in Europe, this is a great strategy because you make the roads less congested for those who actually need them and give everyone else an affordable and efficient alternative, being Europe's amazing public transport like the trains on the railways. This is arguably the better strategy because even though the vast majority of Americans have access to vehicles at around 91% and gas is comparatively cheap, it still leaves 9% who don't have access to vehicles. What are these people who can't afford a car supposed to do? I mean, sometimes public transport isn't even an option or is simply too expensive for many. So you've now actively excluded those who aren't exactly the most well off from society.
Yeah.
To make matters worse, some US cities actually got rid of their public transport to make room for more cars. I'm not joking. American streetcars like trams were actually removed to make way for bigger roads. Absolutely insane. Compare that to Oslo, Berlin and Madrid, where discussions are underway to restrict or even exclude most cars from the city center. And let's not forget that when you have cars, you also need somewhere to park them. And this is where things start to become rather ridiculous. You see, the United States has 2 billion parking spaces for 250 million cars. That's 8 parking spaces per vehicle. In Europe, it's pretty much a one-to-one with around 250 million public parking spaces for 300 million cars. But to emphasize the ridiculousness of this even further,
Wow.
the area that the US dedicates for car parking is actually larger than the area dedicated for housing people. It's honestly unbelievable that people are being squeezed out of American cities due to regulators wanting to make more room for parking spaces. This simply wouldn't fly in the EU, as it has a whole policy dedicated to improving urban planning. See, the EU spent 115 billion euros between 2014 and 2020 to improve city design by making it smarter, greener, and more connected. Simply meaning they allocated funds to make their cities more efficient, more connected, and better for the environment. And better for the environment they really are. As the average resident in a typical Western US city, such as Los Angeles or Phoenix, contributes approximately 6 times more carbon to the atmosphere per capita than an average European city resident. This is purely the result of not having effective transport solutions, which saves resources and allows people to move about efficiently. And exactly that, moving about efficiently is something most of Europe's citizens are able to do as a result of the European Union. See,
I
most of
love
Europe's
that.
nations
I would love to be in an area where I could just walk or bike the entire time because, you got to dedicate, like for me right now, I'm trying to lose weight, I'm on a diet, and I got to, try to find time after doing this and getting everything else done throughout the day. And then you're like, well, I could go walk and stuff. I mean, you can make it a part of your trip to work, both home and there. And then, like you said, it's much better for the environment. See, I almost wonder if the U.S. is just, when I say too big, I mean too big, but I mean population-wise, too big just to, like, halt everything and say, we're going to do this, I mean? And I don't know.
are in the European Union, which gives the EU citizens a number of perks, which includes a free travel area. This has been one of the most important achievements of the EU, as it makes it possible for an EU citizen to travel freely to other EU member states and stay for up to 3 months. All they need is a passport or even just an ID card. No visas, no trips to embassies, no form filing, just head straight over. This makes it incredibly easy to travel, study, and work in other countries and communities. And having this level of centralization is very important to good design, as it gives the smartest people the opportunity to work where they are most useful. And since good design obviously requires a lot of complicated problem solving and planning, this is very smart. Another smart thing is the incredible biking infrastructure we see in Europe, perfectly illustrated by this map of bike path density in Europe. All the purple lines are bike paths, and there's clearly a lot of them, especially towards the left side of the map, but that's just because this is the home of the Dutch, the Netherlands. Now, the funny thing is, I won't be able to compare this to a map of bike path density in the United States, because such a map hasn't been made. At least I wasn't able to find any, and I can only wonder why. But anyway, what Europe and also the European Union has achieved is pretty remarkable.
Yes, it is.
As it's hard to think of another set of such diverse countries where you would be able to travel so freely, in an efficient and inexpensive manner. I mean, you can literally get from Paris to Amsterdam, for example, in just 3 hours for around $30. Imagine being able to travel all over Asia without any border crossings, checks, or visas, and being able to stay for months at a time. That would be truly amazing. And let's not forget that European design has always been distinctive and very successful. In fact, the continent's history of design and interconnectedness serves as a model for the rest of the world. But even though Europe and the EU are pretty great and have amazing infrastructure, they obviously aren't perfect. And I'd love to hear some of the reasons it might not be, so leave a comment down below if you have some thoughts on this. But that's it for this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
Well, okay, I know I didn't talk as much in that video, but that was an interesting video. I'm really glad I picked that one, because, wow. It just shows how far behind we are over here, you know what I mean? It's like, at the beginning of it, and just thinking of it, you know what I mean? As an American, I almost get a little cold feet. I don't know what the phrase is. It's like, I gotta have my car. You know what I mean? I got a car outside, and I gotta have my car, because I gotta be able to move around and to drive and do whatever I need to do and get things done. But my brain can't wrap it around. It's just right out the door, dude. Just go up on the train. And, you know, just what I really enjoyed was how they allow you to go from country to country to country to country. I think he said for free. If I misheard that, I apologize. But I'm going to say for free. And, you know, you can be from Paris to Amsterdam in 3 hours, you know. It takes me 3 hours to get to Cincinnati, which is still in Ohio. And I got to drive it the entire time. I can't just sit there and chill and, you know, do whatever I want to do, get work done on my way there, whatever, you know, I need to do. So I really like that. Man, it just shows how far behind we are when it comes to that. But at the same time, like I said, it makes me wonder if we're almost too far gone here in the States, because you got to think, the U.S. is like the East Coast with, you know, Boston, New York City, Baltimore, you know, like, it's where your 13 colonies were. So Miami and down in Florida and everything. And then you got your West Coast, you know, San Francisco, LA, San Diego, Seattle up north, you know, all that stuff. And then you got like the good part of the U.S. in the middle, where there's a few big cities, but it's mainly, you know, your rural areas or whatever it is, rural, urban, I don't know, whichever one is, your countryside. So I don't know, maybe we're too far gone for that. But anyway, that was an interesting video, so I'm very glad that we chose that one and watched it, because I enjoyed that one immensely. So thank you all so much for being here. Hopefully you liked the video. If you did, consider leaving a like on it and subscribing to the channel. Share this video with all your friends, and we'll see you guys on the next one. Bye, guys.